Welcome, everyone, to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder. And after the initial clash around Saunders Field, the Union Army reformed to try to dislodge the Confederate left flank on the Orange Turnpike. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider subscribing, join the Patreon page, or purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The Union Army of the Potomac, although defeated in the fight around Saunders Field, reformed fairly quickly despite the heavy losses. Those casualties still in the fields and in the forests of the wilderness came under a new threat. The blast from the rifled muskets and cannons set fire to the forest. The wounded who could walk tried to make it to the safety of their lines, but those unable to move faced the horrific fate of burning alive. Worse yet, the men's cartridge boxes, full of black powder and lead, would set off explosions when caught in the flames, adding further injuries to the wounded. One soldier described the scene. The almost cheerful pop-pop of the cartridge boxes gave no hint of the dreadful horror their noise bespoke. Swept by the flames, the trees, bushes, and logs which Confederates had thrown up as breastworks now took fire, and dense clouds of smoke rolled across the clearing, choking unfortunates who were exposed to it and greatly hindered the work of the rescuers. The clearing now became a raging inferno in which many of the wounded perished. The bodies of the dead were blackened and burned beyond all possibility of recognition. It was a tragic conclusion to this day of horror. But the day wasn't over yet. More fighting would be done amidst the flames in the wilderness. Near Saunders Field, the brigades of Horatio Wright formed up to deliver their own attack against the Confederate left flank. Colonel Emory Upton, on Wright's left flank, went to his corps commander, John Sedgwick, and his division commander, Wright, to inform them both that attacking across the open field in his front would be disastrous. Both agreed, and when the attack commenced, Upton would stay put as the brigades to his right advanced. It was about 3 p.m. when Wright's men stepped off. The thick underbrush, dense smoke from the fires, and charred remains of comrades made the journey difficult. Before they made contact with Edward Johnson's Confederates, the brigades of Leroy Stafford and James A. Walker came out of their entrenchments and attacked. The wilderness hid the Union regiments until a volley erupted, catching the right side of Walker's line by surprise. The 5th and 27th Virginia fell back, forcing the 4th Virginia to pull their line back to protect the flank of the comrades to the left. However, this exposed the left flank of Stafford's Louisianians. With gunfire hitting their flanks and the Virginians beginning to disengage with the strong Federal line, Stafford had no choice but to withdraw. The small 1st Louisiana rallied around Stafford as the brigade commander assured that all of his regiments left the field. He sent the 1st back with their comrades and turned to ride back to his lines when a bullet entered beneath his left armpit and severed his spine. Some of his soldiers brought him back to their lines and laid him against a tree, paralyzed from the shot. As he lay there, the 9th Louisiana, his old regiment, part of Hay's brigade of Louisiana Tigers, marched past. One soldier recalled, "We passed poor Stafford lying under a tree on the side of the road, suffering terribly from his wound." To those who stopped to express their sympathy, he spoke encouragingly, urging them to fight to the last and expressing a perfect willingness to yield up his life for the glorious cause in which he had so long borne arms. Stafford would be brought to Richmond, linger for 3 days, then pass away. President Davis and the First Lady attended the funeral. Hayes and his brigade arrived on the field, poised to halt the Union attack. What he didn't know was that the Federal line had stalled out already, many of the regiments running out of ammunition. Not knowing this, Hayes was going to launch a counterstrike to stop the Union advance. The Stonewall Brigade under Walker was to go with him, but when the Virginians didn't move, Hayes sent a message to Walker reminding him of his orders. Walker promised to advance as well, but when Hayes moved out, Walker's men did not accompany them. The Louisianians found the Federal battle line that overlapped their own. They stood toe-to-toe with the enemy and exchanged gunfire until the bullets hitting their flanks caused them to waver and retreat back to the safety of the Confederate breastworks. One Union soldier recalled that when the Louisianians retreated, within minutes he could hear the clanging of bayonets and tin cups against rocks as the Southerners dug trenches to protect themselves. The crack of axes in trees and the crash of the trees hitting the ground signaled to the blue-coated soldiers that the enemy wasn't giving up. They were strengthening their position against another possible attack. One soldier described it best when he wrote, "The battle had raged furiously along the entire line. The rattle of musketry would swell into a full continuous roar as the simultaneous discharge of 10,000 guns mingled in one grand concert, and then, after a few minutes, become more interrupted. We would hear the wild yells which always told of a rebel charge, and again the volleys would become more terrible, and the broken, crashing tones would swell into one continuous roll of sound, which presently would be interrupted by the vigorously manly cheers of the Northern soldiers, so different from the shrill yell of the rebels, and which indicated a repulse of their enemies. Now and then the monotony of the muskets was broken by a few discharges of artillery, which seemed to come in as a double bass in this concert of death. But so impenetrable was the forest that little use was made of artillery, and the work of destruction was carried on by the rifle. In the headquarters of Meade and Grant, the differing command styles were trying on both Grant and Meade, as well as their subordinates. Grant wanted to push Lee with what troops he had on hand, while Meade preferred to wait until his forces were concentrated before launching any attack. Earlier in the day, Grant had ordered Ricketts' division of Sedgwick's 6th Corps forward. Meade, before Grant's order, had ordered that division to guard the Army's right flank. In the confusion, Brigadier General James Ricketts did neither. It would be 4 p.m. before he would eventually go to the battlefield, and when he did, his division was split up, with one of his brigades under Brigadier General Truman Seymour going to the right flank to extend and reinforce the line there. Meade believed that now, with 2 of his corps ready on the right flank, that he could crush Ewell on the Orange Turnpike. This belief was reinforced when word came from a signal station that troops were seen leaving Ewell's lines and going to the Orange Plank Road, where General A.P. Hill and his corps were engaging with Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps. In reality, the troops moving in that direction were soldiers in Major General Cadmus Wilcox's division of Hill's own corps, simply going to reinforce his fellow division commander. The last year had been miserable for Truman Seymour. He had ordered the fateful charge of the 54th Massachusetts on Battery Wagner outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and he had been soundly defeated at the Battle of Olustee in Florida. Now he was back in the Army of the Potomac, not having been in that army since the Battle of Antietam. Now he occupied the far right of the Union Army at the Battle of the Wilderness. Sedgwick hoped to find Ewell's left flank and turn it with his entire corps, along with Warren's 5th Corps. When Seymour's brigade stepped off, no other brigade followed. Why none of the other brigades joined in the attack was unclear, and the men in Seymour's brigade were scared of what was ahead of them when they realized they were alone in this endeavor. Seymour was in the second line while Colonel J. Warren Kiefer commanded the front line. Kiefer halted his men outside the range of the rebels' rifled muskets and sent a messenger to Seymour informing him that they were alone in the attack and that the enemy overlapped both flanks. Word came back to Kiefer that he was to attack as ordered. Hoping that his original message hadn't got to Seymour, Kiefer waited. Then another message came, stating again to attack as ordered. They attacked and confirmed what they already knew. Seymour's brigade hadn't attacked Ewell's flank. Gunfire rang out from all around the Federal brigade. Bullets whizzed by the poor men's heads and struck comrades all along the line. When the first line faded back, the second line took its place. It didn't fare any better. The Virginians of Brigadier General John Pegram and Hayes's Louisianians were well protected behind log breastworks and taking little damage, but causing horrendous damage to the Ohioans and Pennsylvanians. That line melted away too, leaving a layer of blue soldiers covering the ground. Kiefer was shot in the arm, but would survive. Pegram, riding behind his men and encouraging them, was shot in the leg and likewise would survive the wound. A Virginian remembered the horrors of the battle and the night that followed. Shall that terrible night ever be erased from my memory? The terrible groans of the wounded, the mournful sound of the owl, and the awful shrill shrieks of the whippoorwill, the most hideous of all noises I ever heard on a battlefield after firing had ceased. The loneliness is of itself sufficient, and these birds seem to mock at our grief and laugh at the groans of the dying. Pen and words fail to describe the scene. So far, numerous attacks against Ewell's line had ended in failure. However, as attacks were made at Saunders Field, the corps of A.P. Hill was engaging with the corps of Winfield Scott Hancock over the intersection of the Brock and Orange Plank Road.